yesterday, so you should have received a PDF of this, so I'm just going to get through it fairly quickly. I just put this in because there's some discussion about how hot it's been and baselines and so on, so this is just to make the point that depending on where you start measuring temperature rises, they're different. And most of the data starts in 1880, but pre-industrial actually 1750. Single line summary, warming over the last 3 or 4 years compared to the end of the 19th century is 1 degree, or 1.2 degrees from proper pre-industrial. Okay, I've also put in here some goods and bad ways of saying things, which I'm not going to talk about a lot, but they're in the slide set. They might be useful for you. So we actually have 1 degree compared to the end of the 19th century, not 0.8. And February was actually 1.6 warmer than the end of the 19th century, not 1.35, which the Guardian keeps on reporting. Because 1.35 is based on the increase from the middle of the 20th century. So just to say, there's a lot of numbers, and this is an attempt to clarify them a little bit. So I want to go through a number of propositions about what might be safe and give you some evidence. So is the Paris Accord safe? No. And the reason is that while Paris talked about 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, the actual actions that were committed in Paris are 3 degrees or more. So that's a huge gap between intent and action. This was made really clear by a great report by the International Cryosphere Initiative, which said that if we don't do any better than Paris, then we're going to get to the point of crossing thresholds and we'll really actually have to go back to zero warming to solve the problem. So Paris, by delaying action, actually is making it's a version of a wicked problem, which gets more wicked through the lack of action. So once again, some things that we should or should not say about Paris. I'm doing this quickly. You've got the PDF. And if you haven't, email me spratt.d@gmail.com. The second proposition is about whether 1.5 degrees is safe, because that's what Paris put as a bottom line. The fact is that at 1.5 degrees we are likely to see feedbacks in the system where warming creates the conditions for more warming. Particularly with permafrost, where there are numerous lines of evidence saying around 1.5. I mean, the trouble with feedbacks and tipping points, it's like getting bronchitis, which I just got, is you don't know it till you've got it. So it's hard to predict that you're going to be sick, but this is the case that scientists are saying, 1.5 degrees sustained will probably kick in some of these tipping points, so really not a good idea. And of course, the first 3 months of this year, January, February, March, were on average 1.5 degrees warmer than the end of the 19th century, and we had a bit of a preview, a very short preview about what 1.5 means. And you know what happened, the record heat in India now, record heat in the Middle East, record heat in Europe at the moment, which has been sustained for several weeks now because the system isn't shifting. The fires in Tasmania, the hottest ocean records, and so on. Now, obviously, if 1.5 degrees is sustained, those impacts become much worse than just getting what we got, which was sort of a little preview of them. So I put in black some sort of headline points. There is no carbon budget left for 1.5 degrees. I put out a blog on Friday because an NGO released a really silly report saying we had 6 years left, and I got mad at them. And that blog I put out had 2,500 page visits in the first 48 hours. So it actually, and quite a few emails, so it was actually quite resonant. And there's some hard copies up the back about a carbon budget. So even for 1.5 degrees, we have to draw back down everything we put up from now on. If you want to do less than 1.5 degrees, you have to draw down more than you put up, and probably do some other cooling as well, depending on how quickly you want to get there. This is something that some large groups have decided they can't say because they think it's too demoralising. It just happens to be the truth. So once again, some yeses and nos that are on the PDF I've sent to you. Another thing we've really learned, and this was really important with the barrier reef bleaching this year, so the barrier reef had already lost 50% of its extent over the previous 30 years. Earlier this year, it lost a quarter of what was left. So it's now down to 37% in extent of where it was 30 years ago. Is that even 1 degree, and the sort of variation we got with the El Nino, even 1 degree is not safe for the reef. Because we can continue at 1 degree and have an El Nino like we did this year, which takes out a quarter of it. Another 5 years, you have another El Nino, it takes out another quarter, because reefs take 15, 20 years to recover. And we can now see we're in circumstances where, with a 1 degree trend and a 1 degree trend in the variation, the reef will actually not survive. So it's not just a question that 1.5 is not safe for the reef. I think we can reasonably conclude from what's happened that 1 degree isn't safe either. And in fact, we know that because two of the world's great climate scientists, Herr Goldberg and Charlie Veron, in 2009 said, what is safe for the reef is under 320 parts per million, which is basically, if we're at 280 pre-industrial, which is well under half a degree of warming. Peer-reviewed science. So once again, some things we should and shouldn't say about the reef. 1 degree is not safe. A safe level is 320. Only restoring Holocene conditions will stop a multi-metre sea level rise. Difficult but true. Another reason why 1.5 degrees is not safe is we already have evidence, 2 peer-reviewed papers in the last 4 years, saying that, to the best that scientists can work out, the parts of the Antarctic ice sheet have already passed their tipping point for multi-metre sea level rises. And Philip asked one of the scientists, what would it do to stop this? And they said, about 1970s?
Temperature.
You need 1970s temperature, which is under half a degree. So they think that these ice sheets actually tipped into a different state at around half a degree of warming. Where are we? We talked about this last time. I talked at Bayside Group last week, and this is the one thing that really shocked people. In the long run, every 1 degree of warming produces 10 to 20 metres of sea level rise.
And none of the atoll nations are above 5 metres.
That's right.
In other words, unless you cool, they're all gone now.
And this is Melbourne just with a 2 metre sea level rise and a 1 metre storm surge. So 1 degree is several metres of sea level rise. They've already told us that Antarctica is past a tipping point for several metres. So that's what's already locked in for Melbourne unless we reverse what's happened. Okay, 1 metre would take out 40% of the Mekong and 25% of the Nile Delta. Deltas are the richest cereal growing places in the world. The implication is fairly obvious. Some more things about what we might say. The Earth has already reached dangerous conditions. 1 degree of warming is not safe. So that's just another black slide conclusion. And an interesting example of that is Syria. Who saw the Age of Consequences film that Luke put on? I mean, it's really clear in that film the climate impacts multiplying the Syrian threat. So what would be safe? I have to know what's in this PowerPoint. We have a Faustian bargain. When we put up fossil fuels, we're also putting up short-run cooling agents called aerosols, sulfates, which are worth about half a degree of temporary cooling. So if we go to zero emissions, one of the things we're going to get is half a degree more warming because we've lost this Faustian bargain. So effectively, without drawdown or other measures, we've got 1.5 degrees in the system now. And 1.5 degrees, of course, would be really devastating. A safe climate is well under 1 degree. In fact, it's less than 1.5, which is the Holocene maximum. And I'll just explain that. Oops. So this is temperature. We came out of the last ice ages, 10,000 years ago. This is called the Holocene. This is where human civilization started. It warmed up. It was really up there, and then over the last 4,000 years, it's dropped down a bit. So this is the Holocene where temperatures have basically been within a range of 0.5 degree over that whole period, which is why sea levels and civilization is stable. So when we got to pre-industrial, the first 0.5 degree of warming has taken us to the top of the Holocene. And now, with another half, that red line is a bit out of date, with another 0.5 degree above the Holocene maximum. So when people talk about the Holocene maximum, that's the picture. Another, if we continue with Paris, we're going to get another 0.5 degree of warming over the Paris period, effectively locked into the system. So Paris, as it is a very bad outcome. This stuff you all know, we have to aim for zero emissions faster than no time at all. And there are obviously 3 strategies: zero emissions fast, draw down, and if it can be proved to be safe and effective, other measures to cool the planet, because we're already in the danger zone and starting to break through tipping points, for example, in the Antarctic. Almost there. Conventional adaptation mitigation strategies are not sufficient in themselves to solve the problem. I think it's really important that we say this, because the discussion, the public policy discussion we have is based on a set of strategies that are not sufficient to solve the problem. And the reason is, and I just want to finish by contrasting 2 paradigms. The current policy-making paradigm, so we have the key goals of international policy-making from the UNFCCC goals to ensure food production is not threatened and achieving a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally. Now that's what international policy-making is supposed to be producing the array of goals. So the system has given up on the goals that it's set for itself. And the reason why is we have a paradigm of gradualism, the primacy of economic concerns over scientific realities, and a primacy with market levers. You know, it's all got to be carbon taxes because that's efficient rather than actually doing it. An inadequate scientific basis, a dissonance between goals and actions, and a report which I've just started reading, which Ian Dunlop put me onto, called Thinking the Unthinkable, which is an amazing report, and I really suggest, if you're interested in this, it's the sociology of why the most senior levels of management in both government and global CEOs cannot deal with the problems they're currently facing. It has a sociological, psychological components called Thinking the Unthinkable. The website's called that. And they talk about an executive myopia of business and government which makes the obvious and unpredictable unpalatable. It's not that they don't know things are coming, they just choose to decide that they're not coming. So what I call black swans in their language, which is things you can't predict, are actually black elephants. They're just the elephants in the room that they decide to ignore. It's not about climate change, but if we're trying to understand why the sort of decision makers we need to convince to change behaviour are having trouble thinking in this world of increasingly rapid change and wicked problems, this is a really good insight. And then of course the emergency mode paradigm that we've talked about for a long time, of a large-scale transition, using all the known safe solutions and implementing them at the maximum scale, supporting the research to solve problems, and doing it as fast as humanly possible. So I think that's a contrast of the 2 paradigms. And I'll just finish with, so the question was, why is emergency scale action necessary? My answer is because it's now the only practical solution. So when people say to us, why are we advocating this emergency scale action? I think that's one of the answers we should give, because there's no other solution that people can put forward that's actually practical and will solve the problem. And just to finish, the Climate Mobilisation America put out a thing called the Victory Plan. Paul Gilding wrote an introduction for it. It's well worth reading, and he said, and it's a good argument, the elites and policymakers are wringing their hands in despair. They broadly agree on the problems but have no serious solutions to propose except more of the same failed trickle-down economics. The climate mobilisation provides a far smarter way forward and the basis for building a serious alliance between those concerned about economic and political stability. But it also might be an approach that could quite reasonably be seen as mobilisation to save the economy, and frankly, it's the best idea we have to do so. And I think that last little bit is once again a very positive argument for that as decision makers in this report and their CEOs of Unilever and this sort of thing are saying, we can't solve the problems anymore. And I think the notion of what might seem a radical idea of climate emergency actually will solve some other problems as well is a really compelling one that Paul's put in that essay. That's it.
Thank you if anyone wants to click through it.
Thanks, David, for that. We've got 10 minutes allocated.